Alright folks, welcome back. Sheepdog Smokey here, and I'm testing this one more time before I completely decide to give up on OBS. I've heard that it is a decibel setting, I've heard it's the mic itself competing with the onboard, other things that I'm not 100% sure on because I've honestly never really done anything like this until I started recording. When I was recording in the bedroom, it was a different setup and not where there was the same kind of background noise. So I'm hoping that the decibel setting where I have set the distance from the computer, angling things, and so on is going to help. If I see when I actually get this uploaded, I still have the reverb, I will ultimately have to take a break until I can learn another program. Moving on to the topic, though, this one is rather short because it's a continuation of a topic that I've talked about before, and that is how students are demanding their classes be changed because they get offended by things. The latest I've heard is that there are some students somewhere demanding that World War II in its entirety no longer be taught because it's upsetting to them. This is unacceptable to me. Students are not in class to demand that topics be changed, topics be twisted, or topics be ignored, especially history. History is taught so that we learn from the mistakes of the past. Yes, history has always been, and always will be written by the victor. But even with that being said, Germany ensures that the truth about Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Hitler, and everything that went on be taught, or at least the last time I checked they do, so that they don't repeat that horrific instance in their history. I don't enjoy reading about the monstrosity of action from Hitler's Nazi regime. I don't enjoy reading about periods of history where people are slaughtered for their faith or for any other reason because they simply don't conform to the ideals of a tyrant. I don't enjoy reading about slavery. I don't enjoy speaking about any of it, but I will continue to, because those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And sadly, those of us who do learn from history are doomed to be dragged by the morons who ignore it into a repetition of it. World War II is an incredibly dark time in our recent history in the terms of human existence. It sprang from the aftermath of World War I, the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was very harsh to Germany in particular. Their military was all but destroyed. They could not do certain things. I mean, national defense was all but taken away from them. Hitler, who had applied to an art school and been denied entry, ultimately became Chancellor of Germany, and then all of a sudden was just ruling with an iron fist. He had his Anti-Fascist League. Sound familiar? Anti-Fascist Action. Antifa literally uses the Nazi Anti-Fascist League flag, just with their own wording. And they went around censoring and silencing anyone they wanted, destroying relics of the past that didn't conform with their ideals, and screaming that they were fighting fascists while being fascists themselves. Now, for several years, the U.S. didn't want to get involved. We had, in just 2 decades earlier, fought a massive war, and were in the latter years of a depression. We were finally coming out of it. But we couldn't ignore it, and December 7th, 1941, a date that will live in infamy, we were attacked by the Imperial Japanese military. Pearl Harbor, ships sank in their dock. There are still men just entombed in the USS Arizona, because even with today's technology, it's unsafe to go in to get their bodies, and their bodies at this point would be unrecoverable. We had people, and this is one thing I do appreciate about Pearl Harbor as a movie and Saving Private Ryan as a movie, is the authenticity of those films. Because we see in Pearl Harbor, one of the Army pilots volunteers to go and fly for the RAF. We saw people in the World War II era going to Canada to volunteer to fight with Canada, which was already involved in the war. And we had Americans who would volunteer to be transferred to British units to fight before the U.S. fully got involved. Once we did, and this is the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan, D-Day, June 4th, 1944, really the beginning of the end of the war. We saw the boats, and you see the men throwing up. And I would agree to a point with one of the people who had said why this happened. In the video, breaking it down, and one thing I do agree with, the boat driver would not have been American. The boat driver running people from Dover to Normandy would have been Brit. It would have been a British soldier or sailor. But that, I can ignore that, because really they're having to cast with who they have. But you see the soldiers throwing up on these skiffs crossing the English Channel. And in the video, it brought up that they were basically fed a last meal. They were given a very heavy British meal. I mean, it would have involved a lot of pork, a lot of very heavy foods. And anyone who's ever been on the lake or out on the ocean on a boat, you know that if you eat a very heavy meal and then you're suddenly rocking back and forth, as those boats were, you're going to lose your lunch. Honestly, they should have been fed, rice and chicken broth, something that would not have just sat in their belly. But they were also scared for their life. They were petrified. We had been getting newsreels for months and months, and even longer, even years, with what's going on in Europe. So they knew what they were going after. They knew that the German military had entrenched on those hills. We see the Tom Hanks character, the shaking hand, and he has to grab his canteen to stop the shaking. And then when you hear 30 seconds, that's very much what would have happened. The captain just snaps into captain mode, starts issuing orders, starts telling them, don't bunch up. One man on his own is a wasted shot. 5 men together is a target of opportunity. You see them, as soon as the doors drop, just machine gun fire, ripping through them. First 3 and 4 ranks of men just dropped. So the men go over the side, but they're wearing all this heavy gear, and they drown. Now, I will say, even in 2-3 feet of water, those bullets would not have been just zipping through the bodies. In 2-3 feet of water, pardon me, in 2 to 3 feet of water or more, those bullets are going to spall out, and they're going to just start tumbling and veering off. Water is incredibly dense, and it does not move out of the way. That's why when you see these low water crossings blocked off, even big trucks don't drive through it. I was on a fire department and was flat out told if I ever got my license to drive, we don't go through rushing water. Water is a force, and you're never gonna beat it unless you remove it. So the men who went over would have drowned, not been shot. A bullet might have hit and maybe broke the skin, but it wouldn't have zipped through a body after having to fight for all its momentum in water, especially salt water, which is more dense than fresh water. Just the way it is. Now, I understand it was theatrical at that point, but you see the horror. The men walking around, looking for their arm, screaming for their mother as they lay dying. The priest running around giving last rites. The medics working frantically, just giving painkiller after painkiller, morphine dose after morphine dose after morphine dose, until finally there's an opening and the momentum shifts. That is the beginning of the end of the war. My great uncle was there on Normandy Beach on June 4th, 1944, a tank commander. He called them murder boxes. The guns that were being fired could go through that tank, and he saw his friends and his colleagues killed. He managed to fight for the entire war and come back. I'm very glad he did, because I had the privilege in 1995, as a senior in high school, to sit for a Saturday with him. And I got there bright and early. My great aunt had a cup of coffee for him and a soda for me, lunch, then later dinner, as he told me. Everything from enlisting through basic, through learning to be a tank commander, to all through Africa against Rommel, Normandy Beach, all throughout Europe, ultimately liberating Buchenwald. Now, I have been incorrect. I had thought for many years that he was one of the men that rolled into Auschwitz, but that would have been the Red Army. The U.S. would have ridden into Buchenwald. Both horrific places. And he rode through the streets of Paris, and they were ripping the Nazi banners down, taking them off the buildings. They didn't deserve to be flown, as they rode in triumphant, having routed the German army. And as we all know, Goebbels and Hitler and the rest fled to South America or took their own lives. They were too cowardly to face the repercussions of their actions. It's not a pretty story, and that's a very brief retelling of it. I could go on for hours on end speaking about World War II. When we get to 1939, on my history series, it will be multiple videos. Rommel himself will be 2, maybe 3 videos. It's just that much information. And I'm not going to pull any punches. I'm not going to sugarcoat things. And I'm not going to ignore a 6-year period of U.S. history simply because some snowflake children find it upsetting. History is supposed to be upsetting. History is supposed to be offensive in certain places. Robert Oppenheimer famously quoted some Hindi text, "Behold, I am become death, destroyer of worlds," in his regret for the part he played in developing atomic weapons. You just have to know that the men who dropped Fat Man and Little Boy on Hiroshima and Nagasaki were traumatized when they realized the devastation wrought by those 2 bombs. But it ended the war. I mean, I understand that an overmatched situation will bring an enemy to its knees. But there are some things looking back where now we go, couldn't we have just, destroyed the Imperial Palace? Bombed a few ammunition depots or a few bases, taking out the actual hostiles, not innocent civilians. It's questions like that that we get to ask now that we can look through the lens of history that you can't afford to ask at the time. And only the lens of history, being able to look back and say, okay, how could this have been done differently so that we don't do it again? That's why you study the offensive parts. That's why you study the upsetting parts. That's why you study every part of history, because you don't want to repeat the parts that upset you, but you have to know about them so that they upset you enough to have that drive to say, never again. Anyway, I've gone on long enough. My voice is finally back to some semblance of normalcy, as you should be able to hear. I'm hoping that the audio on this is better than it has been, but we shall see. Let me know what you think. As always, be civil in the comments. We're not here to scream and yell. We're not here to rant and rave like toddlers. We're here to discuss, dissent, and debate like adults. Please do so. Please remember to like and share the video to affect the algorithm and widen the channel, as well as to subscribe and turn on notifications so that you're aware of all videos like this that are off my schedule, and you're part of the giveaway at 500, 1,000, and 1,500 subscribers. Until next time, everyone have a wonderful day.